I was here in Los Angeles at the time, and I read it and I was totally captured by it, fascinated by the period, fascinated by the fact that it peeks behind the doors, and the real machinations of the end of apartheid, and what occurred, what was spoken about, what the belief systems were at the time, and how such a seismic change could happen in a country, and it's just by tinkering away at it, by just knocking away the little chinks in the armor of something that seemed as powerful and as permanent, unfortunately, as apartheid could just sort of crumble under various bits of pressure. Yeah, I think there's always a danger if things are around a table and people talking around a table that it's just going to be a kind of talking heads drama, and I think one of the things that the filmmakers were very aware of was that they wanted to make it something that was going to stand on its own as a piece of film, and therefore have a kind of genre aspect to it. And what genres can you really look at with this kind of with this sort of material? And of course, it has to end up in the genre of a political thriller. And I think that with the nature of the secret talks and the nature of the danger that people were in from the South African security forces at the time, that it does lend itself to an air of a kind of a paranoid thriller aspect. So the hope is that you have a kind of combination film, that you get a lot out of it in terms of its historical perspective and historical accuracy, but also you're able to enjoy it on the basis of it being a political thriller as well.
Do you think that some of society's ills could be eliminated if there were more open lines of communication?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that communication and diplomacy is an art form. I think that it needs a certain specific circumstances, to be present. South Africa just had a number of different circumstances that allowed this kind of formation to exist, and one of them is that there was so much heavy investment, there was so much at stake business-wise, and that South Africa was crippling the economy of the country, and it was not going to be possible for apartheid to sustain itself in a competing global world. It couldn't, and if you look at the world now, I mean, the idea that apartheid could have survived, in today's climate, it's impossible. Nobody would trade with the country. Nobody would be interested. It's morally bankrupt, and the idea that people were recognizing this as early as then, and started to put in process a system whereby they could remove themselves from that structure and still retain the financial institution and this financial structure of the country, as well as handing it over to the ANC and moving into a democratic country, really saved the nation. It saved it as a part of as a global player, and that is something that people very smartly recognized, back then. So so within the specific moments, and recognizing where countries are, where they need to get to, how they need to formulate themselves in order to move forward, I think negotiations, talks, open lines of communication can be, absolutely instrumental in bringing about incredible seismic change in any country.
And Becky's been a lightning rod for controversy both during the events of Endgame and post-apartheid during his presidency. What's it like playing such a controversial figure?
Well, it's interesting, that these in the times of the film, and Becky was, was as he's portrayed, in the film, he a very incredibly intelligent man who had a very distinct political, social objective, and was moving forward along that path. He was in many ways a career politician, in that he sort of seemed to be groomed from the time he was born for a position of power within the hierarchy of the black South African arena, and in some ways, achieved all of those things. After he became president of South Africa, he has attracted a lot of controversy, And the specific machinations of the controversy is up for debate. I mean, I suppose the two main ones would be the situation with the AIDS crisis and also then the situation with Zimbabwe. And and he has attracted as many detractors as there have been people who have been kind of positive, or at least have understood some of the perspectives that he was coming from. And in some ways you can't play that in retrospect, you know what I mean? You can't. I was doing a character, I was playing a part of somebody in 1986, and you can't do that, about this character in 2009, so you play it for the moment. But what I learned was that in that time, and if there's any consistency in somebody, then you're dealing with somebody who has incredible love for his community, love for the people of South Africa, and a need and a desire to represent them well. It sort of places me in a position where I feel that there's probably a number of different sides to the stories and to the situations that he found himself in. Also, he's somebody who is political, and maybe somebody who believes that the ends justify certain means. So, who knows?
So, the operative in Serenity, Mike Terry in Red Belt,
Yeah.
and Lola in Kinky Boots.
Sure.
3 very different, diverse characters. I'm wondering, what draws you to very complex, very different roles?
I think I just read something and I feel like if it excites me, then I feel compelled to pursue it. I don't know, I have no real process of judging scripts or of working that out. I just feel that it just immediately comes off the page, and I can see very clearly whether it's something that I can picture myself in the middle of, and I think that when that happens, then I'm just very kind of excited by it and happy to pursue it, and it doesn't matter what it is, any character, any situation, can potentially spark off, the fire.
And in portraying real-life figures such as Mbeki or Dewey Hughes in Talk to Me, how much research do you really do beforehand?
It depends. You end up having to do quite a lot most of the time. With Talk to Me and Dewey, one of the major things was I wanted to learn about Washington. I just didn't know enough about Washington. I knew, there was this huge gap in my knowledge, I think, really. I knew like the sort of Mark Twain ideology of kind of the Washington days, the kind of, the sort of Abe Lincoln Washington, and then there was just this huge gap, and then you're sort of in the present day kind of Congress hearings, in that sort of Washington. You're in Watergate, you're in, and then there was just the sort of other side of Washington, how it really became, this sort of central place, this central sort of axis in the international world, and how it became just a kind of fulcrum in the 60s for all of these movements, and how divided and split it was, and how in a way the city itself represented this whole side of America. That there was there's Washington and then there's DC, and I felt like it was such an interesting place for these guys to be in and involved in, that it kind of was, it was really important for me to learn as much as I could about the city itself. So that's what I started there, and and I think that with different projects you want to start from different places, and there's different things you want to learn about in order to somehow find your way into the character. And with Mbeki, it was slightly simpler. I just wanted to learn everything about him. I knew a lot about the history of South Africa, and I'd done projects in South Africa before, but I really wanted to know about him, about his life, and certainly about his early life, and start there to kind of build up a perspective on who he was and who he is, and just what his energy is, and where his thoughts would be focused in that time, and kind of how he'd carry himself.
And then what do you hope is the legacy that Endgame brings to audiences who watch it?
I just think that it's got a very optimistic message. I think it's got a real optimistic message about negotiation, about peaceful talks, about conflict resolution, about the fact that massive changes can happen even if they're perceived as impossible, and that impossible is nothing, and that with the sustained efforts of people, of intelligent people, of smart people, of committed people, even the most sort of the juggernauts of oppression can be eradicated.